Well, in the past few weeks, we've spoken a number of times to Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond. She is a former judge in Saskatchewan and is a law professor at the University of British Columbia and the director of the Indian Residential School History and Dialogue Center there. Ms. Turpel-Lafond, good to see you again. Thanks for making time to speak with me again today.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
What is your reaction to yet another bombshell in this continuing story, and that's the resignation of Jane Philpott? What's going on here, do you think?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to recognize that this is an extremely influential individual with immense credibility, akin to the credibility of Jody Wilson-Raybould. And not only has she stepped down, but she too has provided a letter, and her letter points to issues of principle and obviously deep concern for the rule of law. So this is a serious day that this has also come out, and I think it reinforces that there's a deeper constitutional crisis here.
How deep do you think it is? What do you think this tells us with her resignation today and the way, as you say, she left by saying essentially she doesn't have confidence in her own government, not for the way it interfered and not for the way it's handled the response to that interference?
Well, I think it's important to note that she's a Liberal. I mean, she's served in very senior cabinet positions as Minister of Health, Minister of Indigenous Services, and as Treasury Board Chair. These are very senior positions which have required a lot of competence. She's been a loyal and dedicated member of the executive that is serving at that cabinet table. But her letter speaks to the fact that she cannot have personal confidence based on what she has heard at that cabinet table. And stepping down and resigning is obviously the right thing to do. But what it demonstrates is that something has gone down at that cabinet table either before Ms. Wilson-Raybould's resignation or since, that it continues to be of deep concern to her. This is not just a political loss, but it also speaks to the substance of the concern we have here, because her letter speaks to the fact that the Attorney General, as an independent role, should not be the subject of undue inappropriate influence. And she also speaks to the fact that her constituents were speaking out.
Right.
So this is an ethical decision by her, but also suggests there's a bit of an upswell in terms of the grassroots level of support for the Liberal Party.
But how are we supposed to, how are we supposed to contextualize this in the sense that, okay, Jody Wilson-Raybould resigned, Jane Philpott has resigned, but there are a couple of dozen other cabinet ministers who think what's gone on here is not cause, at least at this point, for resignation. So when Canadians look at that and this whole issue of confidence, what do you think we need to consider?
Well, there is going to be a lot of pressure on all of those people around the cabinet table. I mean, it's coming to a stark place where they're going to stand up and be counted. I mean, even on the weekend, I noticed that the Globe and Mail had interviewed some, and some refused to speak. You can kind of have cabinet confidentiality and communications directors and party apparatus, and you can run and hide from positions. But now with Minister Philpott's resignation, I think it's going to be a mirror is going to be held up to that entire cabinet, and each one of them is going to face it, which is, where do you come down in this situation? And there's something at stake here that's bigger than partisanship. And what's at stake is a fundamental issue with the rule of law. So I don't think you can put another face on it. We've seen a few weeks where they've attempted to trot out various explanations. Certainly some kind of a smear campaign or undermining Minister Philpott. I mean, it's going to, first time it might be tragedy, but second time it's going to be comedy. So we'll have to see how it unfolds. But it certainly makes the week ahead seem like there could be more ministers that step back at this point if something more fundamental doesn't change.
Right. So, I mean, we'll see over time here in the next little while how the government messages all of this and what the Prime Minister has to say. But, I mean, is this a bona fide crisis in the government, a crisis in cabinet with the departure of these two ministers over this issue?
Yeah, I think it's a bona fide crisis because it's the fact that we're dealing with a very fundamental principle in the rule of law, which is that the Attorney General, as the Chief Law Officer of Canada, has to be able to do her job without political interference. the evidence and information that's come forward is that there wasn't confusion. We don't necessarily need to redefine the roles and so forth. The confusion was really that they continued to steamroll someone who was acting in her function, in her role. She was fired. Let's remember, Jody Wilson-Raybould was de facto fired here. And this whole thing reflects a fundamental issue about whether or not the government of Canada is defending the rule of law or they're defending the rule of their political expediency and their choices. And it sounds stark, but I think we're coming into the territory where it's hard to nuance this. And when Minister Philpott has filed this kind of letter, it appears to me she's done some pretty serious soul searching and she's reflected on it. And again, like my experience in engaging with her in any way, she's a very thoughtful, well-calibrated person who doesn't rush off to do anything harsh and has deep commitment and connection to the Liberal Party. So this would have been a very hard decision for her, I'm sure.
A couple of quick questions to finish up here. Speak to me, what also is clear about this is this is two very, very powerful women in the Trudeau cabinet, and it was all about, when the appointments were made, it was about gender parity. We've seen that, and we've already seen some politicians tweeting that this is what happens when principled women are in cabinet. Something happens they don't like. This is how they respond. And talk to me about that a little bit. Is there something significant about the fact that the two people who are gone are both strong women in this cabinet?
I think the fact that they're women, it's not irrelevant, but I think the focus that you put in the question on the principled component, I think it's the issue. This isn't a gender issue. However, the gender-based attacks on former Minister Wilson-Raybould were harsh and severe. The whisper campaigns, the overt attacks, the racist and sexist cartoons and so forth. It's been a bit of a free-for-all circus as senior ranks of the Liberal Party kind of stood back and let it, or perhaps orchestrated it. So the gender dynamic to me is, yes, not wanting to be a bystander to that kind of abusive positioning, but I also think it's just about being a person of integrity, whether it's a man or a woman. A person of integrity does not sit comfortably with the kind of violation of the rule of law that Jody Wilson-Raybould outlined to the House of Commons. And remember, we still haven't heard from Jody Wilson-Raybould about what happened from the time she was fired till the time she resigned. This is only going to get deeper, I think, until there's some other type of course correction here on this important file.
And to finish on this, I thought the timing of her resignation today, Jane Philpotts, was significant. Whatever she has heard from Jody Wilson-Raybould, whatever she has heard from cabinet colleagues, from the Prime Minister, from others at the highest levels of government, was not, whatever she's heard from the government wasn't enough to convince her to want to hear more from Jerry Butts, who's going to testify on Wednesday before the Justice Committee. She didn't even wait for that. So one presumes he's going to come and have a defense for his actions and a different interpretation of what happened. But Jane Philpott is having none of that. She didn't even want to wait for that. Is that significant?
I think Minister Philpott, perhaps one can infer from her letter and discussing principles that she doesn't want to be party to some type of a charade that maybe makes up a bunch of after-the-fact rationale for behavior. This is a really difficult thing. And as a matter of fact, if anything, this suggests to me that maybe that Justice Committee is not the forum and we do need a proper inquiry about what happened here, because the issues are so serious that I'm not confident that in that partisan atmosphere that there's going to be adequate ability to address the dimensions of these issues.
All right, Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond, as always, thank you for your perspective on this. Great to talk to you again.
Thank you.